Look at this position now. 3 pawns versus 2. And if you trade the rooks, the knight endgame is drawn. If you trade the knights, the rook endgame is drawn. The only chance for white is in the pawn endgame, but it's very difficult to play this. First, Pragg goes rook b7, cuts everything off on the 7th rank. Step by step, let's see how Pragg plays. My mind said that you should put your pawn here and plonk the knight in the center. But I'm not very happy with f4, because then the black rook starts to enter and hassle me on the 2nd rank. So I want to see how Pragg does it. He first attacks the knight. And I really want to observe Pragg's body language. You see, even though the position is drawish, the power with which he's making the moves, the way he's pressing the clock, he's just all in there. This is why he's one of the best sort of technical players of the present era. King comes out to f3. So first activating his king, not touching his pawns for the time being, activating his king. Rook e7 played. Now an important decision for Pragg. Should he keep the rooks? I would have kept it. I would play my rook to a6, but he takes another important decision. Maybe to learn from Pragg. King takes e7. And this is drawn, Pragg has 19 minutes, Caruana has 33 minutes. Now he plays his knight to c5, and look at some trappy play now. The knight covers these squares. King d6 is a bad move because this results in the knight trade. So Fabi is somehow, these squares are all taken away from his king. So king f7 is played, and now Pragg moves ahead with his king slowly but surely, moving ahead with his king, and Caruana gives a check. Well, the king is further going to move in with king e5, I believe. So Pragg takes his time and now moves his king further inside. Fantastic play there. Now the knight has to go where knight e7 is played. So in a way, white has kind of improved his position a lot with the knight and the king, and now Pragg moves his h pawn, gain some space on the king side. Okay, knight c6, check. Where can the king go here? Do you want to go further in to d6? Do you want to go to d5? Do you want to go to f5? He plays it to e4, and there's a rule where if the king is one square diagonally away from the knight, it's very difficult to check that king. So Pragg keeps his king on e4. Fabi goes h6. And now Pragg plays his pawn to g4. He wants to go f4, f5, maybe g5, maybe h5. I don't know. He's just slowly and calmly improving his position. Knight goes back to e7, and now the knight comes to d3. Some plan of putting his knight on e5 with a check. Caruana brings his king up to f6, and Pragg brings his knight to f4. So he's threatening knight d5 check, and he has 7 minutes on the clock. Caruana has 21 minutes. Now if knight d5, the pawn endgame is lost, but he plays g5. Caruana very quickly, because now knight d5 takes, there's gh4, and the position is drawn. So Pragg takes. Now if he must take with the king, if he would have taken with the pawn, knight d5 is winning for white. So he takes with the king, pawn to f3. Slight improvement in the position of Pragg, it feels. But actually, Caruana has simplified the position to such an extent that it is now a draw, because if the knight moves, there's always h5 that can be played. So Caruana has everything under control here. Pragg goes knight e6, check. And now you can go king h4, you can go king g6, you can go king f6. He goes king f6, calmly attacking the knight. And Pragg offers the knight for trade. Again, not a good idea to trade. White is completely winning here. So Fabi has to avoid the knight trade. He goes knight to e5. And now Pragg simply plays his king to f4. The knight jumps into d3. King comes back to e3. Pragg down to 2 minutes 38 seconds. Caruana has 19 minutes on the clock. So at this point, it feels like the most logical result of the game is a draw, because Pragg doesn't even have the time. King f4. Maybe it's a repetition coming in. Check. And now Pragg. How does he continue here? He plays his king back to g3. He wants to maybe go f4. Slowly maybe try and improve with his king. Knight to e1 played. Well, he can push his pawn forward now to f4. You can see Praggnanandhaa taking his time on the clock. Now down to 1 minute 30 seconds. It's also quite impressive how Caruana has managed his time, because he has 15 minutes on the clock. In spite of having an inferior position, he's kept a time lead. Knight comes back to f3, and now the knight goes to b4. And Pragg now moves his knight to d2. So he wants to give a check and push the king away. Let's say the king goes to e6, then later the white king can try and attack here. So knight d5, knight comes up and gives a check. I think very logical is to keep the king somewhere on g6, but he goes to e6. Well, in a way you can't really move your king to h4 because f4 is hanging. So he plays his king to f3. Also pushing the pawn to f5 would allow king e5. So king f3 is a non-committal move. Knight goes back to e7 and Pragg goes knight g3. You can see how Pragg is playing his moves very quickly. Now he's eyeing the h6 pawn. King d5 played by Fabi. And king comes to e3. So now the knight cannot really move because there is knight f5. So he comes back with his king. And Pragg moves ahead with his own king. Very interesting how slowly and steadily Pragg is trying to put the pressure. And with 1 minute on the clock, he also has to move fast. Caruana has 9 minutes. King e6 played. You still can't play knight f5 because that would just cripple the pawns completely. So he plays knight e2. He's going for a check here on d4. Knight g8 played. Nice move there by Fabi. He's trying for knight f6 check. And Pragg goes knight d4 check with just 40 seconds on the clock. Now very important for Caruana to place king to f7. That's the only move. King d6 is met with knight f5. But king f6 looks also fine for the time being. But knight f5 is a very powerful move there. Oh, Caruana blunders. What a big mistake. He had to go to f7 because then knight f5, there's knight f6 check. But he goes king f6 and now knight f5 and Pragg is winning. Pragg is completely winning here. You can see Caruana is a little bit perplexed there. Pragg has 30 seconds on the clock, king e6, but how is Pragg winning here? Well, the point now is the next move of Pragg, king d4, amazing move, and Caruana is in zugzwang. Because h5 there's knight g7, knight cannot move because this is hanging, king cannot go anywhere far away. Goes king f6, but now is the next move which Pragg has seen. He's completely winning. Knight takes h6. Yes, he takes the pawn and look at Fabi there. He's blundered big time. He can't believe what he's just done. The position is completely losing now. Caruana is 2 pawns down and the game is over. Pragg is winning. King e4 from a completely drawn position. Praggnanandhaa has managed to outwit world number 2. How does he do it? Well, that game showed exactly how Pragg does it. He keeps complete focus. He keeps trying. He's very, very interested in the game. He's calculating. And then when the opponent blunders, he's there to take advantage of it. Knight comes to f7, and now this is quite an easy thing for Pragg. Even though he has just 20 seconds on the clock, converting this is not so difficult for a player of Pragg's caliber. He brings his king up, king to f5. And Caruana now gives a check. King moves ahead, king to e6. Knight goes to c6. Maybe it's time to push your pawn forward. Yes, f5 on the board. He gives a check. But now Pragg can just move his king to f6. Once again, one square diagonal to the knight. Black goes king g4, and after knight d6, everything's well protected. Yes, knight d6, and now the g-pawn is simply running down the board. Whew, what a game this has been. And now Fabiano Caruana looking for his final options there. He resigns.